Every Sunday morning, I woke up feeling fine. By Sunday night, I couldn't remember how I got to bed. For 11 months, I told myself it was the wine. Then I told myself it was stress. Then I stopped telling myself anything and just accepted that Sunday evenings made me disappear. My husband, we'd been married 4 years, had a different explanation every time. Too much sun. Not enough sleep. You've been overdoing it, sweetheart. He'd say it so gently, touching my face the way you touch something fragile, and I'd believe him because I wanted to, because the alternative was too strange to hold on to in the daylight. His name was Daniel. He was 34, a project manager at a civil engineering firm outside Columbus, Ohio. He coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings and remembered the names of every cashier at our grocery store. He was the kind of man that other women's husbands wished they could be more like. Our neighbors said that. His mother said that. I said it too once. We had a tradition. Sunday dinner with his parents. Every week his mother would cook. Pot roast in winter, grilled chicken in summer, always the same peach cobbler from the same recipe card she'd had since 1987. It was warm and ordinary, and the kind of ritual that makes you feel like your life is built on something solid. I always passed out before dessert. The first time it happened, I was embarrassed. I'd fallen asleep on their sofa mid-conversation, just gone, like someone had switched off a light. Daniel drove us home, and I apologized for a week. His mother said it was fine. Don't worry, you worked so hard. She patted my hand. She had a very soft way of making you feel like a child. The second time, his father suggested I get my iron checked. The third time, Daniel made a doctor's appointment for me. My blood work came back perfect. My doctor said I was healthier than most people she saw. I sat in the parking lot afterward and cried without knowing why. By month 6, it had a rhythm. I'd arrive at their house feeling normal. We'd sit in the living room while his mother finished cooking. We'd eat. And then, somewhere between the main course and the end of the evening, I would lose hours. I'd wake up at home, already changed into pajamas I didn't remember putting on, with a glass of water on my nightstand and Daniel asleep beside me like nothing unusual had happened. He always said the same thing in the morning. You were really out of it last night. I brought you home. You probably needed the rest. I started dreading Sundays. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't know what to say. That I kept falling asleep at my in-laws' house? That sounded like a complaint about being bored. My best friend from college, who lived in Portland now, would have laughed or worried. And I didn't want either. My own mother had passed 3 years earlier. There was no one I fully trusted with the strange, soft fear that had started living in my chest. So I did what I always did. I managed it alone. I started paying closer attention. I kept a small notebook, spiral-bound, the kind I used to carry in college, and I wrote down everything I ate and drank each Sunday. I noted the time I arrived, what I consumed, when I started feeling heavy. The data, if you could call it that, didn't tell me anything useful at first, but the act of writing it down made me feel less crazy. What I noticed, eventually, was the tea. His mother always made a pot of chamomile tea after dinner. She was particular about it. Loose leaf, steeped exactly 5 minutes, served in the same ceramic cups she'd had for decades. She'd hand me mine first, always, before anyone else. It was a small thing, the kind of gesture you read as affection. One evening in February, cold, the roads icy, the kind of night where the windows fog from the inside, I decided not to drink it. I didn't make a show of it. I held the cup. I moved it to my lips twice. I set it down and forgot to pick it up again. I pretended to sip when she glanced over. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. I drove home that night, myself, alert, slightly wired from the anxiety of watching my own experiment in real time. Daniel was quiet in the passenger seat. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't say a word about it. The next Sunday, same thing. I didn't drink the tea. I went home clear-headed. I lay in bed while Daniel slept. and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, something is in the tea. And then, right behind that thought, another one. He knows. Because Daniel had been there every Sunday. Daniel had watched me fall asleep and carried me to the car and tucked me into bed, and in the morning called it rest. He had never once suggested we skip a Sunday. He had never once said, let's figure out what's happening to you. He had steered me toward his mother's house every single week with the quiet persistence of a man who needed me there. I want to tell you that I confronted him that night. I want to tell you I was braver than I was. But the truth is, I lay there next to him and felt more alone than I have ever felt in my life. And I didn't say anything. I just started planning. I didn't go to the police immediately. I know how that sounds. I know because when I eventually told people this story, that was always the first thing they said. Why didn't you just call the police? And the answer is, I had nothing. I had a notebook full of observations about tea. I had a pattern that any doctor could attribute to anxiety or a thyroid condition or a dozen other things. I had a husband who had done nothing visibly wrong, who was respected and liked, who everyone would believe before they believed me. I needed something real. I called in a favor from a woman I knew, a paralegal I'd worked with briefly at my firm before I moved to a different practice group. She'd gone through a bad divorce herself a few years back, and she had a number for a private investigator she trusted. I called him from my office with the door closed. His name was Marcus. He was 60-something, former law enforcement, spoke in short, declarative sentences that I found instantly calming. I told him what I'd observed. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He said, let's see what we're working with. What we were working with, it turned out, was worse than I'd imagined. It took Marcus 3 weeks. He followed Daniel on 2 evenings I didn't know about. He pulled some background I couldn't have accessed myself. And then he sent me a file, just a PDF, plain, delivered to a secure email he'd set up for me, and I opened it in a Panera booth in Dublin, Ohio on a Thursday afternoon, and I didn't move for 40 minutes. Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy on me 14 months ago, $1.2 million. He had listed himself as sole beneficiary. He had not mentioned it to me. We had never discussed it. The beneficiary change had been filed the same month my Sunday blackouts began. There was more. Daniel had been seeing someone. She wasn't a random affair. She was a pharmacist. She worked at a CVS 20 minutes from our house. Marcus had photographs of them together, receipts, a timeline. They had been together for over a year. She had a specific kind of knowledge that I didn't want to think too hard about. I sat in that Panera until the staff started stacking chairs. Then I drove to a parking lot and I called Marcus and I said, very carefully, what would someone need to do this? He told me, access to certain sedatives. A small dose, repeated, consistent enough to establish a medical history of episodes, maybe push toward a diagnosis that could complicate things later, or maybe just waiting for one night when the dose was stronger. He said it like he was reading from a textbook. I think he did that on purpose, to keep me from falling apart. I held it together until I got home. Then I went into the bathroom and sat on the floor with my back against the tub, and I shook for a while. Not crying exactly, something quieter. The specific grief of realizing the life you thought you had was a set. After that, I got very still and very focused. I called a lawyer. Not anyone Daniel knew, not anyone connected to my firm. A woman in a city 2 hours away who specialized in exactly the kind of thing I was trying to survive. I told her everything. She said, don't move money, don't change behavior, don't let him know you know. She said it like a coach giving a pre-game talk, and I was grateful for that. I set up a separate bank account at a credit union across town. I began slowly, carefully, moving small amounts. Nothing dramatic, nothing he'd notice if he checked. My direct deposit still went to our joint account. I was meticulous. I started gathering. Every document I could photograph, I photographed. The insurance policy. I found the paperwork in a locked box in his closet that I'd never had reason to open before, a box I'd assumed held old tax records. The policy was right on top. I took pictures of every page. I found statements I didn't recognize. A second phone tucked into the pocket of a jacket he never wore anymore. I left everything exactly where it was. I took pictures and put it back. The second phone had texts I didn't read past the first screen. I photographed them and closed the phone and put it back and went downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the neighbors' kids ride bikes in the cul-de-sac, and I thought, I need to be smart. The hardest part was the Sundays. I still went. Every week. I sat at his mother's table and I ate the food and I thanked her for cooking and I listened to his father talk about the Buckeyes. I held the chamomile tea and pretended. I watched his mother's face when she handed me the cup, looking for something, I don't know what, guilt or apology or awareness, and I never found it. Either she didn't know or she was better at this than I was. I started wearing a small audio recorder to their house. It was the size of a USB drive. I kept it in my cardigan pocket. It picked up everything within about 15 feet. Most Sundays there was nothing useful. Dinner conversation, the sound of silverware, his father's laugh. But one evening in March, the last Sunday in March, the night the clocks had just changed, everyone a little off schedule, Daniel and his mother were in the kitchen longer than usual. I could hear them from the dining room while his father showed me something on his phone. Their voices were low, but the room carried sound the way old houses do, through the walls rather than around them. I heard her say, she still doesn't know. I heard him say, it has to be soon. The policy's been active long enough. I didn't react. I looked at his father's phone. I said, oh, that's beautiful, about a photograph of a river I didn't see at all. I had what I needed. My lawyer had been in contact with a detective at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, a woman named Detective Okafor who specialized in domestic fraud and financial crimes. I met her in a coffee shop in Worthington on a Saturday morning while Daniel thought I was at a yoga class. I sat across from her and I handed her a folder and I watched her read through it without showing anything on her face, and then she looked up and said, "This is good work." She meant the documentation, the photographs, the recordings, the policy, the timeline Marcus had built. She said, here's what we need to make this stick. What they needed was for him to say it directly, not to his mother in a kitchen. That was hearsay, and it was his mother, and defense attorneys were going to work with that. They needed him to say something incriminating to someone he didn't know was listening. Detective Okafor had a plan. I would tell Daniel I was going for a solo weekend trip to visit a college friend in Pittsburgh. I would leave on a Friday evening. The department would have someone watching the house. They expected he would contact the pharmacist, which would begin to establish the conspiracy. But the bigger piece was what they wanted me to do before I left. I would plant a conversation. Friday afternoon, before my fabricated trip, I told Daniel I'd been feeling dizzy again, that I was worried something was genuinely wrong with me, that maybe I should see a specialist. I said it casually, standing in the kitchen with my overnight bag by the door. I watched something move across his face. Relief or anticipation or both, I still don't know. And he said, yeah, sweetheart, you've been off for a while. We should figure it out. I said, maybe Sunday dinner will help. Being around family always makes me feel better. I'll come back Sunday instead of Monday. I watched him recalibrate, watched him decide. He said, that's a good idea. I drove to Pittsburgh. I actually did visit my friend. She'd been told only that I was in a difficult situation and needed a place to land for a weekend. She didn't ask questions. She made pasta and we watched 2 movies, and she let me sleep 10 hours on Friday and 11 on Saturday, and when I left Sunday morning she hugged me for a long time without saying anything. I wore a wire to Sunday dinner. It was different from the recorder I'd been using. This was set up by the department. Smaller, cleaner. connected to a monitoring unit in a car parked on the street 2 houses down. Detective Okafor was in that car. Her partner was in another car at the other end of the block. I ate pot roast. I had 2 bites of peach cobbler, and when his mother handed me the chamomile tea, I drank it. I had taken a specific medication beforehand, prescribed and monitored, not a risk, that counteracted the expected sedative effect without clearing it so thoroughly that I seemed obviously unaffected. Detective Okafor had worked with a physician on this. The goal was to seem like I was going under, slowly, the way I always did. I let myself get quiet. I let my responses slow. I rested my head against the back of the sofa. And I listened. It didn't take long. His mother left the room. His father had gone to bed early. He always did. It was the one predictable thing about those evenings. And Daniel sat across from me and made a phone call, and I heard him say, in a voice so calm it was almost worse than anger, "She's under." Yeah, same as always. It should look like she just didn't wake up. A pause while he listened. Then the policy's clear. It's been 14 months. We talked about this. The front door opened 40 seconds later. I want to be clear, I was not fully under. I was aware. I heard everything. I heard Daniel's voice change when he heard the door. Confusion first, then a sound I don't have a word for. I heard Detective Okafor identify herself. I heard his mother come back into the room from the hallway. I heard her voice crack. I heard Daniel say, very quietly, that he wanted a lawyer. I sat up. I remember the way he looked at me. Not angry, not desperate, just completely blank. Like I'd rearranged something fundamental about the world he understood. Like the thing he thought he knew had turned over to show him a different side. I didn't say anything to him. There wasn't anything to say. The pharmacist was arrested at her home that same night. She had purchased the sedative triazolam, a controlled substance not available without a prescription, using her professional access, and dispensed it to Daniel over a period of 14 months. Her license was suspended pending criminal charges. She was cooperative with investigators, which her attorney later argued should count for something. Maybe it did. I wasn't in the courtroom for every session. Daniel was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. His mother was charged as an accessory. The kitchen conversation on the wire plus her call records were enough. His father appeared to have been genuinely unaware. I believed that when I heard it. I still do. I had a victim advocate through the DA's office, a woman named Cheryl, who called me every week and walked me through every step of the process with a patience I hadn't expected from the legal system. She was the first person who said, out loud, in a professional context, "What he did to you was methodical and serious, and you were right to be afraid." I hadn't realized I needed to hear that until I heard it. The divorce was finalized 5 months after the arrest, uncontested for obvious reasons. My attorney had filed for equitable distribution under Ohio law, and because of the fraud and the circumstances, the settlement was in my favor. I kept the house. I didn't want it. I sold it 8 months later. The life insurance policy was voided by the carrier once the criminal charges were filed. I received a small settlement from the carrier as well. Not the policy amount, but a fraud disclosure reward that their legal team structured as a consulting payment. It wasn't life-changing. It was enough. I live in Asheville now in a rental near downtown that has good light and creaky floors and a landlord who leaves me alone. I started over here. New city, new job, new routines. I make my own tea in the mornings. I drink it standing at the window, watching the mountains do their morning thing with the light. Some Sundays are hard still. Not the danger kind of hard. That's over, and I know it's over. The other kind. The kind where you grieve the version of your life you thought you were building. The warmth of it. The pot roast, the peach cobbler, the feeling of being held inside someone else's family like it was also yours. That woman is gone. I'm not sure I miss her exactly, but I think about her sometimes. The way she held a cup of tea and believed it was affection. I know better now. I know what my body feels like when it's clear. I know the difference between being loved and being managed. I know to pay attention when something in my chest says this is wrong, even if I can't prove it yet, even if it would sound crazy said out loud. I know how to write things down. I know how to wait and gather and be patient, and when the moment comes, I know how to be ready. There's a version of this story where I never picked up the notebook, where I kept telling myself it was the wine, the stress, the long week, where I trusted the softness of his voice over the evidence of my own body. That version ends differently. I know that now in a way. I can't unknow. What I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, just from living through it, is that the choices we make when we're afraid reveal more about who we are than any choice we make when things are easy. I was afraid for almost a year, and in that year I had to decide over and over whether I was going to be a woman who waited for someone to save her or a woman who paid attention. I chose to pay attention. That was the first honest thing I did. There's something I want to say about Daniel, because it would be easy to make him only a villain in this telling, and I think the truth is more instructive than that. He was not a stupid man. He was a careful man who believed that caring about appearances was the same thing as having a conscience. He had built a life that looked correct from the outside. The house, the youth soccer, the remembered names of cashiers, and somewhere along the way he confused the performance of goodness with the thing itself. That confusion cost him everything. It cost him his freedom, his family, the version of himself he'd constructed so carefully. What he did was wrong in a way that's hard to put language to, but I think about how it started. Some small compromise, probably, some moment where he chose convenience over integrity, and I think that's where it actually began. Not with the policy, with the first time he decided his comfort mattered more than someone else's life. I don't say that to excuse him. I say it because I think it matters where things start. For me, what saved me was a combination of things I don't think I could have named in the middle of it. One was a kind of stubbornness, the refusal to accept an explanation that didn't hold up, even when accepting it would have been easier. Marcus used to call it good instincts. I think it was simpler than that. I just kept asking, does this make sense? And when the answer was no, I kept going. The second thing was the willingness to think clearly when every part of me wanted to panic. Finding the lawyer 2 hours away. Setting up the credit union account in small increments. Wearing a cardigan to dinner for months because it had a pocket the right size. None of that came from courage exactly. It came from deciding that falling apart was something I could do later after. That clarity, the deliberate, disciplined kind, was something I had to choose every single day. And the third thing, the one that's hardest to explain, is that I kept going even when I wasn't sure it would work. There were Sundays when I drove to that house and sat at that table and I thought, maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe I'm the paranoid one. Maybe he loves me and I'm destroying something real. I had those doubts. I held them and kept going anyway. I live in Asheville now. I make my own tea. Some mornings I stand at the window with the cup warm in my hands, and I think about the woman who sat on a bathroom floor and shook, and I don't feel sorry for her. I feel proud of her. She was scared and she kept her eyes open. She wrote things down. She waited until she had something real and then she used it. That's enough. That has always been enough.